Bună dimineața! Bine ați venit! Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second edition of the Affordable, Sustainable Mobility organized by APIA, the Romanian Association of Producers and Importers. I will speak in Romanian. Please, all the English speakers, take your earphones. It will be a parallel translation. Domnule prim-ministru, domnule fost prim-ministru, avem doi prim-ministri cu noi. Dear Mr. Bozela, the President of OICA, dear François, dear Adina, fostul nostru comisar al transportului și actual eurodeputat, stimați membri ai Consiliului Director APIA, ai APIA, stimați membri ai Organizației Internaționale a Constructorilor de Automobile, doamnelor și domnilor, bine ați venit! Cred că e un moment istoric, pentru că, așa cum veți vedea în mica mea prezentare, suntem într-un moment foarte important al industriei și, cum spuneam deja de câteva zile, după Paris, care a fost luni și marți, capitala mondială a automobilului s-a mutat la București. Ca și fapt divers, John Bozela a avut un speech și la Paris și îl va avea și aici. Cine este APIA, organizatorul din această zi? Am să încerc să vă dau, sper să funcționeze tehnologia ca de obicei. Voilà. E bine, APIA este probabil una din cele mai longevive organizații care s-au născut în România după decembrie 89. Anul acesta, mai exact în această seară, sărbătorim 30 de ani. Și cu ocazia acestei sărbători speciale ne-am gândit să organizăm și adunarea generală a Organizației Internaționale a Constructorilor de Automobile, care va avea loc mâine. În câteva cuvinte, APIA s-a înființat într-un moment în care România era, vorbesc pentru cei mai tineri, foarte departe de ceea ce este astăzi. Erau ani în care câțiva oameni inimoși lansau această idee, încercau să discute cu autoritățile de atunci despre problemele automobilului, încercau să pună, popular vorbind, România pe roate. Când mă uit acum în urmă, eu fiind unul dintre acești fondatori, nu vă ascund că am o nostalgie gândindu-mă cât de departe a evoluat România, a evoluat Europa, a evoluat planeta și, așa cum veți vedea în cursul acestui forum, cât mai avem de lucru și de evoluat în continuare. În 1996, România a devenit membră a Organizației Internaționale a Constructorilor de Automobile. N-a fost neapărat o chestiune simplă, dar nici una foarte complicată, doar că ne-am făcut temele foarte bine. Și mă refer la 3 oameni care am contribuit. Eu, Călin Popescu-Tăricianu, pe atunci președinte APIA, și Paul Schiaucu, pe atunci vicepreședinte APIA. Și am făcut-o atât de bine încât mi-amintesc că fostul prim-ministru Radu Vasile îmi spunea: bă, dacă tot vă pricepeți, poate ne ajutați și pe noi să intrăm în Uniunea Europeană. Vă dați seama cât de înaintea timpului a fost APIA în intrarea în organizații internaționale. Mergând pe repede înainte, organizația noastră, începând din 2022, a devenit Organizația Întregii Mobilități din România, pentru că astăzi lucrurile au evoluat, sunt complexe, sunt de dimensiuni în diverse domenii. Nu mai putem vorbi doar de mașină cum era odată, îmi iau o mașină, o iubesc și asta e tot. Acum lucrurile au devenit foarte interesante și APIA se dezvoltă în acest sens, zicem noi, din ce în ce mai bine. Iată, suntem în 2024 aici împreună la această întâlnire importantă și dați-mi voie să merg mai înainte. E bine, aici noi avem o serie întreagă de valori pe care aș vrea să vi le supun atenției foarte pe scurt. Când vorbim de inovație prin colaborare, noi înțelegem parteneriate solide cu toți cei implicați, inclusiv industrie, autorități, în a găsi soluții creative la niște probleme complicate de foarte multe ori. Diversitate și incluziune, cred că toată lumea înțelege. API a devenit un exemplu de diversitate și de incluziune în lumea automobilului, în lumea, în general, în lumea socială, pentru că la noi lucrurile au evoluat așa cum e firesc să evolueze într-o societate, într-o asociație modernă. Suntem mai nou și exemplu la Consiliul Concurenței pentru că ne dau de exemplu, pentru că am înțeles ce înseamnă și cum trebuie să funcționeze o astfel de organizație. Ne preocupăm, evident, de ceea ce înseamnă responsabilitate socială și ecologică. Avem o dezvoltare continuă și suntem cei care promovează dezvoltarea durabilă, dezvoltarea sustenabilă. Și anul acesta ați văzut că am pronunțat de mai multe ori și accesibilă, pentru că ne-am dat seama că degeaba poți să faci o mobilitate sustenabilă dacă ea nu e accesibilă. Noi trăim în România și cu atât mai mult cu toții înțelegem cât de important este să dăm cât mai multor oameni șansa la mobilitate. Și sigur că da, flexibilitate și adaptabilitate sunt alte valori cu care operăm. E bine, aici m-am gândit să vă spun în două cuvinte că misiunea noastră este să construim un viitor echilibrat și responsabil, foarte important cuvântul responsabil. Sub conducerea mea, actualul Consiliu Director își asumă răspunderi și în fața Guvernului, și în fața consumatorilor, și în fața membrilor, lucru care noi credem că așa trebuie să fie. De aceea, când voi reveni la ce am făcut concret, o să vedeți care este atitudinea vis-a-vis de responsabilitate. Sigur că ne dorim un ecosistem de mobilitate accesibil și, vă spuneam, sustenabil, iar ca obiective, sigur că trebuie să facem împreună tranziția către emisii zero. Am scris până în 2035, pentru că, e bine să nu uităm, avem o lege votată în Parlament, de fapt a fost votată de 2 ori, în Parlamentul European. Până când această lege va fi schimbată, noi la APIA trebuie să o respectăm și cred că până una alta noi toți trebuie să o respectăm. Dacă forțele politice din actualul Parlament, și aici sunt convins că Adina ne va aduce elemente, vor hotărî altceva, sigur că da, România, noi toți, ne vom alinia. Dar e bine să nu uităm că mai avem legi în Europa și cu atât mai mult în România și să nu încercăm tot timpul să ne simțim toți datori, să fim conducătorii planetei și să tot încercăm să schimbăm, fără să știm de fapt despre ce este vorba. Avem un off, noi la APIA și presa știe, cu dezvoltarea infrastructurii pentru mașinile electrice. Comisia Europeană a elaborat recomandări, România nu le-a realizat și sunt convins că domnul prim-ministru ne va adresa cu siguranță cuvinte legate de acest subiect atât de important. Sigur că ne dorim, vă spuneam, parteneriate și foarte important pentru noi este să informăm în mod obiectiv pe toată lumea, în primul rând consumatorii, astfel încât un consumator să poată lua decizii în cunoștință de cauză. Noi la APIA credem, și asta este o mantra noastră, că orice om are dreptul să știe ce face, ce cumpără. Din momentul în care știe corect ce cumpără, este decizia lui. Nu poate să fie supărat pe nimeni. Noi, ca industrie, avem datoria să-i oferim toate oportunitățile, urmând ca fiecare consumator să decidă. Într-un penultim slide, eu vorbesc despre ceva acțiuni, vă spuneam. Noi ne-am diversificat, asta înseamnă că am intrus în APIA, apropo de ce este a mobilității, și companii de mobilitate, stații de încărcare, R&D, IT, asigurări. Deci este un portofoliu absolut, nu știu dacă pot să spun complet, dar cu siguranță cuprinzător la tot ce înseamnă mobilitate. Și aici profit de prezența domnului prim-ministru Marcel Ciolacu să spun că noi colaborăm cu toate ministerele de resort cu Guvernul și una din inițiativele care le-am luat, domnule prim-ministru, este să facem un comitet interministerial pentru infrastructură de încărcare a vehiculelor, pentru mobilitate în general. Am avut discuții foarte bune cu domnul ministru Florin Spătaru, sunt sigur că știți, și am spus, ca să vedeți, apropo de atitudinea APIA, am spus în discuție cu domnul ministru Spătaru, ca să transmit domnului prim-ministru, APIA, în toate aceste discuții, este un partener tehnic. Noi operăm la APIA cu informații certe, date statistice, studii, prognoze. Noi nu operăm cu datul cu părerea, după ureche. Părerea mea este, noi tot timpul încercăm să aducem acest profesionalism în discuții și i-am spus domnului ministru Spătaru că vom fi doar un partener tehnic. Nimeni din APIA, nici președintele de onoare Călin Tăricianu, nici președintele APIA, Dan Varghie, nu au nici o secundă intenția de a deveni președintele acestui comitet. Dimpotrivă, îi sugeram domnului ministru Spătaru că poate un ministru pe care domnul prim-ministru îl va decide să fie președintele acestui comitet, de care este absolută nevoie pentru a dezvolta infrastructura, pentru a dezvolta mobilitatea, și un ministru ar putea avea puterea politică să genereze și rezultate. Eu o recunosc, nefiind om politic, eu nu pot genera rezultate, dar sunt sigur că cu ajutorul noastră, domnule prim-ministru, poate reușim să facem acest comitet. Avem discuții, aș spune, a la long time cu Ministerul Mediului. E bine de știut că o bună parte din ce s-a întâmplat la programul Rabla, nu anul acesta, în trecut, a fost și munca lui APIA. Din păcate, anul acesta, Ministerul Mediului și Ministerul de Finanțe, practic, au tăiat fondurile. O spun public, noi la vremea respectivă, i-am spus domnului ministru Fechet că nu credem că va fi o soluție bună dacă se va tăia, pentru că rezultatele nu vor fi cele așteptate. Sigur că atunci treburile mergeau foarte bine. Iată că, din păcate, rezultatele le știți cu toții. Suntem în Europa, din punct de vedere a dezvoltării electromobilității, din păcate, de unde eram în trend cu toate celelalte țări, România este în zona cea mai neplăcută. Sigur că dacă vorbim de România și Germania, amândouă sunt în aceeași situație, dar parcă totuși la noi este într-o altă situație. Promovarea rețelei de încărcare și, evident, Forumul Mobilității. În continuare, ultimul slide. Aici aveți cei care vor vorbi astăzi. În primul rând, imediat am să dau cuvântul domnului prim-ministru Marcel Ciolacu, am să-i dau cuvântul domnului președinte Bozela, am să-i dau cuvântul doamnei Adina Vălean, doamnei Sigrid de Vries. Îmi face mare plăcere să vă spun că este alături de noi. Este directorul general al Asociației Constructorilor pentru Automobile, una din cele mai vocale organizații ale industriei din Europa și, zic eu, din lume. O să avem vorbitori, președinți de la diverse organizații, China, după cum vedeți, Australia, domnul profesor dr. Bernd Goldschalk, care are am să-l prezint la momentul respectiv, care are un nume fabulos, este o legendă în Germania, fiind, între altele, fost președinte al Asociației Germane, al VDA, fost președinte al OICA. Apropo, avem 2 prim-miniștri și 2 președinți OICA, ca să vedeți cam cât de mic sau de mare a devenit București. Domnilor și domnilor, acestea fiind zise, haideți să ne dorim să facem treabă bună și, așa cum spunem noi la APIA, să încercăm că la sfârșitul zilei, după ce vom fi discutat, ascultat această multiperspectivă la nivel mondial, pentru că lucrurile nu sunt deloc la fel aici în România sau aici în Europa, cum sunt ele în Australia, cum sunt ele în Statele Unite, cum sunt ele în alte regiuni, și veți vedea asta. Haideți să vedem că la sfârșitul zilei să fie ceva interesant și să plecăm acasă cu informații. Vă mulțumesc. Domnule prim-ministru, vă rog.
Bună dimineața! Mi-aș dori să fiți un pic îngăduitori cu mine în această dimineață. Îmi spuneam domnului prim-ministru Tăricianu Azi de dimineață am avut așa după mult timp, o pornire mai diesel. A trebuit să mi încălzesc bujiile. Și, în primul rând, cum este și normal, doresc să adresez un mesaj de bun venit la București domnului John Bozela, președintele Organizației Internaționale a Constructorilor de Automobile, și de asemenea doresc să felicit Asociația Producătorilor și Importatorilor de Automobile, APIA, la împlinirea a 30 de ani de la înființare și mai ales pentru organizarea acestui forum al mobilității sustenabile, cu o participare atât de numeroasă, atât din țară și din străinătate. Doamnelor și domnilor, este o onoare să mă aflu astăzi aici, la acest eveniment cu totul deosebit, organizat de Asociația Producătorilor și Importatorilor de Automobile din România. Industria auto românească a demonstrat de-a lungul anilor o capacitate extraordinară de adaptare și inovare. Iar astăzi suntem aici pentru a celebra aceste realizări și pentru a discuta despre viitorul sustenabil al mobilității. În acest context, cred că planul nostru de reindustrializare a economiei pe care ne pregătim să-l lansăm vine să susțină această industrie strategică a țării. Acest plan vizează transformarea României într-un hub de tehnologie și inovație în Europa de Sud-Est în următorii 10 ani. Ne propunem să atragem investiții semnificative în sectorul auto, să dezvoltăm infrastructura necesară și să susținem cercetarea și dezvoltarea în domeniul vehiculelor electrice și autonome. Este vital să ne susținem industria auto, care contribuie semnificativ la PIB-ul țării noastre și are un rol crucial în volumul exporturilor României. În 2024, producția de automobile a crescut spectaculos, cu peste 600.000 de unități produse anual de uzinele Dacia și Ford Otosan. Aceste realizări nu doar că susțin economia națională, dar și poziționează România ca un jucător important pe piața auto europeană. Evident, vrem să sprijinim procesul de modernizare a acestui sector și a tendinței de electrificare a producției de autoturism. Un exemplu de măsură cu un mare succes este programul Globala, care a avut un impact major asupra înnoirii parcului auto național. În acest program am reușit să scoatem din circulație zeci de mii de vehicule vechi și poluante, înlocuindu-le cu modele noi, mai eficiente și mai prietenoase cu mediul. În 2024 ne așteptăm ca vânzările de autoturisme electrificate să crească cu peste 24%, iar cele de autoturisme pur electrice să ajungă la o cotă de piață de 13%. În încheiere, doresc să reafirm angajamentul României față de proiectele verzi și pentru decarbonarea economiei. Cu toate acestea, trebuie să fim conștienți că tranziția către o economie verde nu trebuie să devină o frână în calea dezvoltării economice a țării noastre și a industriei auto în mod special. Este esențial să găsim un echilibru între protecția mediului și creșterea economică, astfel încât să asigurăm un viitor prosper, sustenabil pentru toți cetățenii noștri. Cum era și normal, înainte să vin la dumneavoastră, consilierii mi-au dat accesul la mai multe informații și la mai multe cifre și statistici. Este evident că următorii 2 ani vor fi o mare provocare pentru industria pe care o reprezentați. Mă bucur mult că este doamna Văleanu aici, stat comisar al României și europarlamentar, și eu cred că este momentul, fiindcă toți suntem la un început de drum, atât al Comisiei cât și al Parlamentului European actual, să avem o abordare mult mai sustenabilă în ceea ce privește industria auto. Dacă nu vom lua măsuri și nu vom trage semnalul de alarmă încă de la începutul acestui ciclu europarlamentar, anul viitor și mai mult, peste 2 ani de zile, vor fi mari probleme în industria auto. Este evident că trebuie să venim cu niște programe de susținere a industria auto, care de fapt a dat toată sustenabilitatea Europei. Suntem într-un moment de descreștere care, dacă nu vom interveni și în România, dar și în toată Europa, va duce anul viitor și peste 2 ani, cum am spus, la disponibilizări masive în acest domeniu. Cred că este momentul în care Comisia Europeană trebuie să vină curajos în susținerea acestei industrii. Am citit și eu, sunt ferm convins că și dumneavoastră, programul Draghi, unde este trecut acest lucru, poate nu evidențiat, dar uităm și când vorbim de reindustrializări și de alte lucruri, uităm că, de fapt, motorul economiilor este industria auto, în care o dezvoltare pe orizontală fabuloasă. Acest lucru se întâmplă și în România și în toate țările europene. Cred că, doamna Băreanu, trebuie să găsim comunicarea și să fiți liantul între Asociația Internațională, APIA, Guvernul României și Comisia și Parlamentul European. E un moment când toate forțele politice trebuie să înțeleagă că fără industria auto în România, economia României se prăbușește. Mulțumesc mult!
Mulțumim, domnule prim-ministru, mai ales pentru ultima parte, ca să fiu sincer. Mai târziu vom vorbi despre ce vrea să spună domnul prim-ministru cu anul care vine, că într-adevăr urmează 2 ani complicați. Sunt sigur că și Sigrid o să vă spună multe, pentru că e o efervescență complicată în Europa în momentul de față pe acest subiect și ca întotdeauna sunt păreri diverse, din păcate. Dar ca să vedeți cât de diverse sunt părerile la nivel planetar, este o mare bucurie pentru mine să-l invit în scenă pe John Bozella, președintele Organizației Internaționale a Constructorilor Automobile. John? Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you. It is a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank Dan Vardier for the very warm welcome he's given me, and congratulations to Dan and APIA for your 30th anniversary and for hosting us as OICA here in Bucharest this year. Mr. Prime Minister Ciolacu, it's been a great pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much. And to Adina Valon, member of the European Parliament, we are honored by your presence today. This is my first time in Romania, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of this beautiful country and enjoying your food over the next few days. I'm John Bozella. For those of you I have not had the pleasure to meet quite yet, I'm the President and CEO of Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We are the U.S. trade association representing the entire auto industry before government and policymakers in Washington, D.C. We include the iconic OEMs designing and producing most vehicles sold today in the United States. We're also home to autonomous vehicle innovators, semiconductor producers, and advanced battery manufacturers. I'm also and of course this is what brings me to Bucharest, the president of the International Organization of Motor Vehicle Manufacturers, or OICA. Let me recognize our fantastic new General Secretary, Francois Rodier. Francois has set about transforming OICA and preparing us for the future. Merci, Francois. As you know, OICA was founded in 1919 at the dawn of the automotive era. We're based in Paris and represent 36 automotive trade associations from the world's major automotive manufacturing countries, including APIA. OICA gathers once a year to compare notes and discuss challenges and opportunities facing our industry around the world. And as the Prime Minister said, we also gather against a backdrop of considerable uncertainty, industry uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty. We've got much to talk about these days, don't we? OICA's mission, in short, is to improve global road safety and environmental standards so all countries and all people have access to the safest, cleanest, and most advanced transportation possible. I want to mention just briefly that we work very extensively on technical and regulatory standards. And I also want to encourage all of you in the industry and with OICA to meet this week with our technical director, Olivier Fontaine. Olivier is doing great work with our regulatory affairs at the European Union, the United States, and the United Nations, and we appreciate his leadership as well. I want to talk a little bit about our focus on decarbonization. OICA is leading the conversation across government and industry in this area. Globally, the auto industry is investing hundreds of billions of dollars in clean energy technologies. Everything from advanced internal combustion engines and low carbon liquid fuels to hydrogen fuel cell technology and, of course, electrification. While electrification is shaping the future in many auto markets, let's be clear, it's not the only answer. We don't believe that every country must or even should adopt the very same decarbonization strategy. Instead, a technology-neutral approach with flexibilities for countries to adopt policies and technologies suited to their geographic, socioeconomic, cultural, and geopolitical realities. This is an approach that offers real opportunity for sustained progress toward a cleaner future. Here's my broader point. Decarbonization requires a government and industry partnership, as well as commitments from the entire road transport ecosystem. No single government policy or industry investment in isolation will achieve carbon neutrality. Let me talk a bit about electrification specifically. Globally, there are 1.47 billion light-duty vehicles on the road. In 2023, about 3% or 40 million were electrified, up from 2% or 26 million in 2022. For some US perspective, there are 286 million light-duty vehicles on US roads. In 2023, 1.5% or 4.3 million of those were EVs. Just a little perspective in the US, gasoline-powered vehicles are down in a big way in the US, dropping 19 points since 2016, offset by the growth in technologies like hybrids, battery electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles. This is good news. It means electric-powered miles are rapidly replacing petroleum-powered miles on US roads. However, the market is spiky. It's continuing to grow, but the rate of growth is slowing. So what's happening? It's pretty simple. We need to find more customers beyond the early adopters and technology leaders, and we have to continue to win and expand our markets to those customers. Just this week, I was at the Paris Motor Show. There are amazing products to see there. But for this transition to electrification to be truly successful and to move as quickly as we all want it to move, we need a deeper, broader, and more strategic partnership between automakers, other sectors of the economy, and government to address near-term challenges. What are those challenges? Access and funding for EV charging infrastructure, consumer awareness and education and incentives at an early point in the market, resilient supply chains that allow vehicles to be built closer to the customer to drive down prices and increase affordability. Unfortunately, what we're seeing from governments in some places and in some cases are policies that are unevenly applied. When I speak to government leaders, here's what I say first. The future is electric. Second, shifting to electric personal mobility requires nothing short of a complete transformation of the global automotive industrial base, and also a reimagination of auto markets around the world. This is a huge transformation. It is exponentially harder than anything ever attempted in the history of transportation. By the way, automakers are investing massive amounts of capital in electrification generated by returns from internal combustion engine vehicle sales. This can't go on forever. So I tell policymakers to be successful, we need to address the necessary conditions to shift the market. I don't worry at all about automakers' ability to produce vehicles. I do worry about whether there is too big a gap between government requirements and customer expectations. In other words, we need a balanced policy approach. I understand policymakers must balance multiple societal goals. They have to consider carbon reduction. They also have to consider jobs, trade, competitiveness, and economic and national security. Sometimes these goals and policy don't line up. Sometimes they're in conflict. What's my point? Passing a law that requires 100% electric vehicles in 10 years is the easy part. Going too fast could create competitive risk for automakers. So I tell policymakers, let's get the balance right. Ambitious EV goals are good, but let's not assume or hope everything will go perfectly. It won't. It never does. The future is electric. This will happen if we work together on a shared vision of success. It's been my privilege to serve as OICA's president for 2 years. I've been in the auto business more than 25 years. I have never worked in a moment of such promise and excitement. I believe now, more than ever, that personal mobility is a force for good that can lift up communities and families. Automaking is one of the world's most consequential and indispensable industries. It's an economic engine and a driver of opportunity and social freedom. Here's my hope for this week and for OICA, that our unique platform and our constructive working relationship means that we can serve as the auto industry's United Nations, a place to share perspective and, where possible, align our national and regional interests to support the greater good, a thriving, growing, and dynamic auto industry. Thank you.
It was such an inspiring, interesting, complex speech about the situation of the car industry today. Thank you very much, John. It was really, really inspiring. Anyway, you will stay, so probably later on we'll have some Q&A session, if you accept.
Yes.
Doamnelor și domnilor, acum este plăcerea, nu numai a mea, cred că a noastră a tuturor, să o invităm în scenă pe Adina Vălean, a doua oară pe această scenă. Adina, te rog.
Onorată audiență, mulțumesc Asociației Producătorilor de Automobile din România pentru invitația de a participa la acest eveniment. Sunt onorată să fiu alături de oaspeți de seamă anul acesta cu prilejul unor aniversări atât ale Asociației din România cât și ale organizației internaționale. Eu am venit de la Bruxelles, unde sunt membru al Parlamentului European și un membru foarte interesat, nu acum, ci de foarte mulți ani, de bunul mers al industriei de automobile din România și din Europa. Suntem, așa cum s-a spus aici, într-o perioadă foarte dificilă, într-un ochi de furtună al dezbaterilor în jurul automobilului și în jurul politicilor privind industria auto din Europa. Aceste dezbateri au multiple fațete, se învârt în jurul faptului că vin termene de aplicare ale unor decizii legislative luate de-a lungul timpului, pentru care se pare că nu suntem cu totul pregătiți. Asta ne face să discutăm din nou despre mașină. Și mașina, așa cum o simțim cu toții, este probabil mai mult decât o tonă de metal și motoare care să ne ducă din punctul A în punctul B. Mașinile reprezintă pentru multe societăți libertatea de mișcare, libertatea de inițiativă, acces la oportunități economice, creșterea productivității și sunt în aceeași măsură conectori culturali și stimuli economici, mai ales într-o Europa atât de diversă geografic, civilizațional și economic. Așadar, automobilul rămâne nu doar un instrument al mobilității, ci un catalizator al productivității și prosperității noastre colective. Chiar și industria auto-europeană nu e o ramură economică obișnuită. Angajează peste 13 milioane de oameni și contribuie cu 7% la produsul intern brut al Uniunii Europene. Dincolo de aceste cifre, industria auto ilustrează spiritul de inovație al europenilor. Companiile din domeniu investesc anual aproape 73 de miliarde de euro în cercetare și dezvoltare, un nivel de finanțare pe care puține alte sectoare îl pot egala. În acest context, niciodată nu a fost mai urgent să ne concentrăm eforturile pentru a menține și stimula competitivitatea industriei auto-europene. Și pentru asta este nevoie de o nouă strategie industrială pentru acest sector. În primul rând, trebuie să promovăm comerțul internațional și să diversificăm lanțurile de aprovizionare pentru a ne asigura că suntem mai puțin vulnerabili la provocările geopolitice și economice. Acordurile comerciale cu piețe emergente sunt esențiale pentru a ne extinde influența globală. Lanțurile valorice complete înseamnă securitate și, prin urmare, prosperitate pentru industrie. Înseamnă că viziunea pe termen lung a companiilor poate livra produse și astăzi, și mâine, și peste o generație. Stabilitatea industriei auto-europene s-a învârtit în jurul unui campion tehnologic, motorul pe combustie. Personal, cred că mulți din această sală conduc o mașină cu un asemenea motor, nu foarte nouă, sau nu atât de nouă pe cât l-ar plăcea distribuitorilor de mașini din această sală, dar atât de bună pe cât au făcut-o producătorii de mașini europeni. Am fost și rămân, nu numai personal, ci ca politician, o susținătoare a neutralității tehnologice. De fapt, motorul pe combustie a fost soluția pe care industria și consumatorii au ales-o într-un anumit moment, din mai multe opțiuni, căci nici mașinile pe hidrogen, nici cele electrice nu sunt invenții foarte recente. Nici o tehnologie nu deține monopolul asupra viitorului, și deschiderea către toate opțiunile tehnologice, de la vehicule electrice la combustibili sintetici, e-fuels, ne poate conduce la un nou campion tehnologic natural sau la mai mulți campioni. Când spun aceste lucruri, nu le spun pentru că aș fi împotriva obiectivelor de climă sau aș nega stringenta nevoie de a scădea nu numai emisiile, ci și nivelul de noxe. Aceste obiective sunt validate științific. Ce vreau să spun este că să atingem asemenea ținte ambițioase, avem nevoie de industrii solide, de inovație, de opțiuni multiple, nu de cămăși de forță legislative. Am fost 5 ani comisar pentru transportul al Uniunii Europene și parte din moștenirea mea legislativă este legislația privind infrastructura de reîncărcare electrică și încărcare cu hidrogen pe rețeaua esențială de transporturi a Uniunii Europene. Am introdus obligații pentru statele membre, am pus la dispoziție și fonduri pentru a transforma obligațiile în realitate. Piața mașinilor electrice în creștere, dar cu fluctuații, o rețea de puncte de reîncărcare egal distribuite în Europa contează în decizia cumpărării unei mașini electrice. 2030 ar trebui să ne găsească în Uniunea Europeană cu 3,5 milioane de stații funcționale. Poate vom face asta? Există interes și privat de investiții, există și fonduri naționale sau europene, dar succesul acestei infrastructuri va depinde în final de capacitatea de a asigura energie curată, ieftină și abundentă, de creșterea capacității rețelelor electrice și de modernizarea lor. Întrebarea e dacă vom putea face asta. Pe 9 septembrie la Bruxelles, Mario Draghi a făcut public un raport despre viitorul competitivității în Uniunea Europeană. Unii au spus despre acest raport că este o rețetă de medicamente pentru restabilirea competitivității europene. Alții au zis că medicamentele sunt prea amare, dar toată lumea a fost de acord că trebuie să avem în vedere mai presus de orice competitivitate. Mai ales în reglementările privind industria auto, trebuie să introducem un test de competitivitate pentru a evalua impactul reglementărilor înainte de implementare. Iar asta nu e un lux, ci o necesitate dacă vrem să menținem industria auto-europeană în elita industriilor la nivel global. Am început prin a spune că suntem într-o perioadă esențială, o perioadă cu transformări rapide. Printre altele, există o revoluție a inteligenței artificiale. De aceea, așa cum industriile trebuie să se miște cât mai agil, și noi, legislatorii, trebuie să revizuim ceea ce ar fi prea împovărător pentru aceste industrii. Mai mult, așa cum și raportul Draghi afirmă, trebuie să susținem și financiar industria auto prin programe specifice de cercetare și dezvoltare dedicate inteligenței artificiale, tehnologiilor pentru conducerea autonomă, combustibililor alternativi. Uniunea Europeană ar trebui să uite în următorul cadru financiar multianual spre scheme de finanțare care să sprijine regiunile și țările producătoare de mașini, așa cum este și România. Ar fi util să revizuim și regulamentele privind ajutoarele de stat, sau să extindem cadrul temporar de criză și de tranziție și dincolo de 2025, pentru a putea face posibile scheme de finanțare pentru transformarea industrială. Și să nu uităm de date, explozia lor cantitativă de la 33 zettabytes în 2018 la 175 zettabytes în 2025 va schimba radical lumea. Iar pentru Europa există oportunitatea de a deveni lider, construind un ecosistem de date în jurul automobilelor. Vehiculele moderne generează date valoroase care pot îmbunătăți serviciile auto și reduce costurile, dar pentru a valorifica acest potențial este nevoie de un acces mai bun la date, de un cadru etic pentru utilizarea lor responsabilă și sigură. Datele nu sunt doar un instrument, ci și factorul care poate propulsa mobilitatea viitorului. Și da, nu am zis, nu am vorbit nimic despre proprietatea asupra acestor date, ci despre felul că le-ar trebui folosite la adevăratul potențial. Uitându-mă spre trecut, am motive de optimism. Industria auto-europeană a fost atât de performantă pentru că în ADN-ul ei a avut inovația și spiritul de pionierat. Să-i păstrăm ADN-ul intact, să-l reproducem pentru viitor. Schimbările și crizele uneori sunt catalizatori ai progresului, dar nu întotdeauna, așa că trebuie să rămânem vigilenți. Vă mulțumesc pentru atenție.
Doamnelor și domnilor, să continuăm cu următorul panel. După cum vedeți, deja lucrurile devin, cum v-am promis, complexe. Nu mai e așa de simplu. Mi-amintesc, apropo de diversitate, și trecem la panel. Acum vreo 10-15 ani, dacă ne uităm noi toți în sală, jumătate din piața în România era diesel, jumătate din piețele europene erau diesel. Apropo de ce spunea domnul prim-ministru, că a avut o pornire mai diesel. Și eram cu toții convinși că este cea mai bună motorizare pentru că emite cel mai puțin CO2. Și eram toți fericiți. Dar în acest mindset, noi românii, noi europenii, și asta nu e o greșeală a românilor, a europenilor, e o greșeală a tuturor oamenilor de pretutindeni, aveam tendința să credem că peste tot e la fel. Adică, cum e la noi în Europa, e și în Statele Unite. Vorbeam aseară cu John, două cifre. În același moment în care în România și în Europa dieselul trecea de 50%, în Statele Unite era 3%. Și vine o întrebare retorică, eu nefiind om politic pot să o spun. Păi cine erau mai deștepți? Americanii sau europenii? Europenii sau americanii? Greșită. Este total greșit să pui problema așa. Te duci în Brazilia, în America de Sud și vei vedea că acolo se folosește etanolul și acolo e o lungă discuție dacă este corect să exploatezi trestia de zahăr, să o faci în loc de zahăr și o grămadă de alte produse alimentare, să o faci combustibil. În Statele Unite, când s-a făcut din porumb etanol, au venit unii și au spus food versus fuel. Cine ne nouă dreptul să facem mâncare sau să facem combustibil? Vedeți? Cine s-ar fi gândit? Și dacă mergem în Australia, dacă mergem în alte zone, evident în Asia, lucrurile stau altfel. Acestea fiind zise, haideți să facem o discuție calificată în următorul panel, care se numește decarbonizare versus electrificare. Și îmi face mare plăcere să invit aici în scenă, pentru a lua loc în panel, pe domnul François Roudier, noul secretar general al OICA. François, please have a seat here. Pe doamna Sigrid de Vries, noul director general al ACEA. Sigrid, have a seat wherever you want, here or there, up to you. De asemenea, să invităm, bineînțeles că tot e la modă, pe domnul Wang Yap, care este Deputy Chief Engineer la CAMA, Asociația Constructorilor de Automobile din China. Wang, good to see you. Let's have a seat here or there, wherever you want. Dați-mi voie să-l invit pe Tony Weber, care este directorul executiv al FCAA. Să vedem cam cum arată, că tot v-am promis, lucrurile în Australia. Și, the last but not least, prietenul meu, Mike House, directorul executiv al SMMT, pe scurt, APIA din Marea Britanie. Please, Mike, have a seat. Am să-mi permit să merg la celelalte microfoane.
So you can use the mic when you want to jump in. Just to mention one thing, and then I will invite Sigrid to tell us her perspective of ASEAN. In APIA, since we have this board, we decided one crucial approach. We have a non-dogmatic approach of the future in APIA, which means we are equally looking forward to the electrification but to the decarbonization. Last year, for instance, we had an interesting speech coming from Orway, which is a part of Geely, which revealed for the first time in Europe their new technologies regarding the new extended range, the new plugins, the new zero-emission ICE engines, which looks like a miracle. In the meantime, things became reality in China, as I'm sure we will learn that. And we all understood back then that the future is not necessarily set in one direction or another direction. And again, as a non-dogmatic organization, we believe that giving the consumers all these perspectives and not using, as Adina said, a kind of complicated legislation system probably will be better for all of us. Based on this philosophy of non-dogmatic is realized this panel. You see, we have OICA, we have Europe, we have China, we have Australia and UK. That's a unique moment here in Bucharest. It's the first time you can hear firsthand informations, trends, the situation in all these regions of the planet, directly from the people responsible for this job. So, Sigrid? Yes?
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you to Appia and also to OICA for organizing this wonderful conference. And I think it's a great, indeed, display of international unity as well. John earlier talking about the challenges of the automotive industry that are very much the same around the world. Maybe different stages of development, but the challenges are. I think I have a couple of slides with me. I don't know if technology will move them for me, or shall I? Thank you. ASEA indeed unites the 15 major car, van, truck and bus manufacturers in Europe, and we are the voice of the automotive industry towards predominantly EU legislators, but also internationally. So I'm really delighted to be here, as I said, especially also as Romania, and we heard this before, is such an important manufacturing country also for automotive, with several plants in operations producing over 500,000 cars last year, and the auto industry here accounts for around 15% of manufacturing jobs. So really an example of how important the industry is across Europe. And indeed, our industry is one of Europe's most long-standing and also internationally successful industries in Europe, playing a massive role in driving economic growth across all corners of our continent. But, and we heard it already a couple of times, the world is really changing rapidly, and this also means that Europe must change tact as well if we are to preserve these important successes. You see some of the challenges that we face here on the slide, and I think it's fair to say that Europe has long sought to be a global leader in sustainability, setting ambitious standards, with the expectations also that others would follow. And this strategy has indeed had some success, as many major regions across the world have often modeled their regulations on the European model, establishing the EU as a global benchmark for environmental regulation. But I think we need to ask ourselves the question, is this strategy still effective today? The world is no longer the same place it was just a decade ago, and can Europe afford to continue to be the standard bearer for global regulation while it faces new challenges, such as fierce global competition and also an unpredictable trade environment, rising costs and a rapidly shifting geopolitical reality. So regulation can indeed be effective and benefit businesses, creating a level playing field or strengthening and deepening the single market in Europe. Those are excellent examples. But Europe needs far more than just regulation if it wants to retain its place as a sustainability leader and an attractive region to invest and also build strategic industries. And the shift from combustion engines, technology in which Europe has traditionally been a leader, to battery electric vehicles represents an unprecedented transformation requiring the creation of an entirely new value chain and also a new automotive market, by the way, which both need to be further developed in Europe. And I mentioned already the geopolitical landscape changing. Legislation compels OEMs to produce and market cleaner vehicles, but regulation or mandates alone do not make markets. And I think that is the fix that we find ourselves in at the moment. We need all three pieces of the automotive decarbonization trinity in place if we want Europe to live up to its sustainability goals. So we need mandates, targets, policies is one piece, but we need also manufacturers that make models, cars, vans and trucks. And then crucially, we need a market also. Customers are very, very important. I think we're facing a lot of difficulty today. The market share of electric vehicles is hovering at less than 15%, and in the face of these new facts, we really need urgent action. Consumers remain, unfortunately, reluctant to make the shift, and I think also John already alluded to it before. We are at that stage where we need to move from early adopters and early movers to a totally different set of customers that also need to become enthusiastic about this technology and make that change. And just to give you another example about the need for charging infrastructure, so important to create consumer confidence, we're seeing charging infrastructure targets really lagging behind and not delivering enough to sustain a healthy market. And we put the example, I think, also on the slides here of what is missing still. My country, the Netherlands, has almost 52 times more public charging points in place compared to Romania. Romania ranks bottom in the EU, unfortunately, and that doesn't really help progressing in an equal pace across Europe. So there can be no doubt that manufacturers remain committed to the Paris Agreement and to the 2050 decarbonization goals, but important targets and barriers remain. I'll try and go quickly through the rest. This one, Mr. Draghi, has been mentioned already a couple of times today. As automotive industry, as I say, indeed, we also very much support his analysis that he put in his report. He dedicated an entire chapter in his report to automotive. The analyses are correct. I think he has made the case that this is not only an important industry for Europe, but there is really also an urgency in terms of getting the balance now right. When I quote from him, the automotive sector is a key example of a lack of EU planning, applying a climate policy without an industrial policy. And I think that's what we have now the opportunity to fix with the new European Commission coming into place soon, and also the new European Parliament already being active and gearing up to do those hearings of the new commissioners. So we're looking forward to that. I'll close. No, that was one too quick. With calling for unity, because none of us can do any of this on our own. Not manufacturers, not policymakers, not markets, consumers, dealers. We need everybody to chip in. We're doing a big event in November and December, 6 weeks long in Brussels. If you happen to be around, please do visit, because we believe we have a lot to contribute as automotive industry, a lot to be proud of, a lot to be confident about, innovation, technology advancement, all of that, and supporting the economy. So we're ready for the next challenge, and we really want to work together with everybody in that challenge. Happy to be here, looking forward to the Q&A later. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie. Now it's the time for Francois to take over. By the way, Francois is the new General Secretary, but he is not new at all. He was working all his life in this industry. He knows so many things, so be prepared. He's not a rookie. He's a veteran like myself. So, Francois.
Thank you, Dan.
Open the mic.
Yeah.
And yes, you're right, Dan. I remember having charts here about diesel, about free trade. Sometimes I'm thinking I was living in a dinosaur's world because now it's changed a lot. And at this time we're talking about a young new member, quite promising, CAM, and you see that that changes. And I think I'll be more radical than the former speakers. I don't think we are living in a transformation. It's not a transformation, it's a revolution. And in revolution, you have winners and losers. And do remember that the history of our automotive industry is a cemetery of famous brands. Where are the Hispano-Suiza? Where are the Pontiac? Where are the Warburg? And so we will have to understand that in the years to come, our world, in the industry, in the car manufacturers, for the subcontractors, equipment manufacturers, a lot of them will disappear. I'm sure there will be mergers and that will accelerate, and we will see this all around the world. Even in promising countries really pushing hard our industry. I was in China in July, invited by my friends of CAM. It's true that they have too many brands. Let's talk about the same brands 10 years from now. We'll see less. And it is something we have to accept. I always say that our auto game, because it's a kind of game for me, I love automobile. In the game you have three players. You have the industry which means the manufacturing plus the services, because we are not sell and forget industry. No, we take care of what we sell. You have the governments and you have the consumers. And it's like in a sci-fi movie. They have to be at the same level. There has to be a connection between the three. If one is not in connection with the others, we have problems. And it's true that from what I've heard right now, industry is pushing hard. The average article in the press about investment is always around $1 billion from the auto industry. So I think we are the only industry accelerating so fast in the ecological transition. And governments, yes, governments are helping sometimes, so then we retracting, then coming back. Everything that is a disaster for industry. We need regular feeding, regular help from the governments. And consumers, yes, you told that. They don't understand really what are the products we are selling. And I was at the Paris Motor Show. It's very good for the motor shows. I can tell you that motor shows are climbing in number of visitors because consumers don't understand what we are selling. So they are asking questions about what is the battery, I don't understand. Do I have to buy it or lease this car? Plenty of questions. And remember that by the past, we love the cars, we are car guys, fanatics, but a lot of our consumers never open the engine and just start the key, and that's it. So it's really important for us, and that's a big job at Orica, to make the customers understanding what are the products of the future, what are the constraints. Yes, charging stations are not there, and if you have the map of Europe, in some countries it's really bad. If you have a world map, it's worse. I think that if I am in Peru, close to Machu Picchu, where is the charging station? And in other places, in town, in cities, you found them. So I think that we are coming to years of explanations, years that will be difficult for some manufacturers. Some will be the manufacturers of the future. It's true that geopolitical affairs are changing this world. By the past, geopolitical was only for defense, aerospace. Now we are on the front page of every CNN report, and that's a change, a major change. What I understood, and I don't want to be the guy who is breaking the ambience and everyone will commit suicide after my speech. So what's positive is that we see that the people need auto. They need auto and they need trucks. If I look at the trucks, 85% of transport is made by trucks, not by rail. So the battle is won. You can upgrade the rail transport, okay, but it is starting from 85%. And it's a changing world. And for the cars, it's unbelievable when I see all the young kids in China, in Indonesia, in Thailand, how they are willing to have cars, because for them it's freedom. Freedom has to be understood in every nation's culture. I think it's very important. Freedom to be a good citizen with having a family and a car, helping the national industry, it is something affecting a lot of people. And freedom to drive in the west side of the USA, as we have seen in many, many movies. So we are keeping this dream. The dream is alive in our industry. And you have a lot of young kids, I've seen them, that are willing to have a kind of PlayStation in their car. And that's wonderful. And we have countries in Europe, it's quite impressive. We have countries where you don't have public transport, and you will never have public transport. Public transport is costing a lot, and it's costing a lot with the taxes, with the people paying taxes for governments or local governments. A car, you assume the cost. You pay your car, so you pay your mobility. And it seems that for the young people wanting to escape their parents, to find partners, it's mandatory. But think about also the nations where we will have more and more aged populations. In Europe, with our friend in Japan, we will need to still have mobility for the aged people. And it's true that it will be a challenge for the manufacturers. You don't design a car for Chinese 35-year-old customers the same way you do it for François Roudier when you will have 85 years old. So this is what we have in mind. It's difficult. There will be leftover in our history, in our future history, but the dream is alive and we have a wonderful future to develop cars in many ways in the future, and I'm not even entering the subject of artificial intelligence that may change everything, that may make the autonomous car affordable. Because I would conclude on this then, behind all this technology thing, transformation, ecology, and so on, the most important word is affordability. If people can buy your car, it's not mandatory to build it. Thank you, Francois. So now let's go in China to Van. I suggest you come to the stand because it's better to people want to see, and it's a little bit difficult by sitting. Thank you.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I am here to representing our Chairman Fu because he valued this meeting very much and he wants to save some time from translation from China to English too. So he gave me the manuscript this morning and he asked me to give us a speech in presenting him. So automobile, we know, has been an integral part of life as well as the development of the world's economy and society. The boom of the automobile industry has lifted the quality of people's life, provided a large number of jobs, and contributed a huge amount of GDP. In Europe, it provides jobs for 13 million people and contributes 8% of GDP. In China, the job it provides accounts for 11% of the total working population. I'm sure all of us here are proud to be a participant in this industry. The industry cannot achieve such a performance without global cooperation and division of labor. major car makers adopt an international perspective. They select high-quality, low-cost parts and components from a global market, establish stable partnership based on the long-term cooperation, and build a global supply system to support large-scale production. Openness and cooperation will remain the core of the industry's future. In the past, the industry worked close together to deepen investment and technological cooperation, promote synergy in standards and regulations, and safeguard trade rules which are fair and mutually beneficial. As a result, we see a better development of the global automotive industry, a more diverse supply of high quality and safer automotive products. We shall continue openness and cooperation to achieve low carbon transformation. The next point is about the fair competition. Fair competition contributes to the sustainable development of the global automotive industry. Competition stimulates the enterprise, pushes them to innovate, reduce the cost, ultimately injecting the industry vitality and vigor. However, competition must be fair. Tariff barrier will only distort the market, hinder innovation, and eventually harm the interest of the consumers and the industry. New energy vehicle is a common choice of the international community to cope with the climate change. China is firmly committed to the development of the new energy vehicles, with a focus on integrations with intelligence. Through continuous R&D innovation, we have made technological progress, achieved cost reduction, and enable an efficient industrial chain to support large-scale production of electric vehicles. At present, the global automotive industry is undergoing challenges. Pressure for green and low-carbon transformation is going up. The integration of AI with the industry is accelerating. We need to strengthen exchanges and cooperations and jointly build a stable and efficient global industrial chain. We're willing to make new changes and create a new future together with the global industry, and provide richer, more environmentally friendly and cheaper automotive products for people all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Tony, please take the mic. Just to be a good one, we will have 10 minutes, maybe 15, depends on the time for the Q&A session at the end. Tony, how are the things in Australia? Too many kangaroos, I guess.
There's a lot of kangaroos, Dan. And thank you for the invite this morning, and thank you for APM for having me. So to understand the situation in Australia, you need to understand the starting point of the market. And when you look at Australia, it is very different to many other parts of the world in terms of the distances, in terms of what people buy, and the fact that we are a large nation with a relatively poor public transport system. We rely very heavily on the motor vehicle. So at this point in time, you can see that the market in Australia is dominated by SUVs at almost 57% of all sales. You then have light commercials, which are almost 23% of sales. Now, these are not vans typically, these are what the world calls pickup trucks, and in Australia we call them utes. So the market is quite different, especially to the European market, where a large concentration of large vehicles through SUVs and utes. Passenger vehicles, year to date, are only 17% of the market, and that number is dropping year on year. So the trend is for growth in the other two segments and a reduction in passenger motor vehicles. We also have the heavy trucks making up 4% of the market. If you then break down what we sell by fuel type, you can see the internal combustion engine still plays a very significant role in our market. So petrol and diesel combined are over 70% of the market. Hybrids, based on petrol, are at 14%. Electric vehicles are at 6.5%, and I'll come back to this in a minute. And you have plug-in hybrids at just 1.7%. So historically, the market has been dominated by petrol and diesel and remains that way. So the government announced earlier this year, in February, that it was going to release its fuel efficiency standard. And to the credit of the government, they talked about their aim was to reduce CO2. It's not technology specific, it is technology neutral. And that is a good thing. They rushed that legislation through, and it went through the Parliament in May, which is an extraordinarily quick time frame in the Australian context. The targets that they have set are extremely ambitious. A 59% reduction in CO2 for passenger motor vehicles. So that includes passenger motor vehicles and SUVs, and the light commercial vehicles will reduce by 47.6% by 2029. So in just 4 years, dramatic improvements in CO2. And for the brands that don't meet those targets, there will be substantial penalties. And that penalty is $100 per gram, which equates to approximately 60 euros per gram. So there you can see those targets. We start passenger motor vehicles this year at 137 grams on average. That needs to drop to 58 grams by 2029. And for light commercial vehicles, we have exactly a half reduction from 220 grams to 110 grams. And that chart shows the level of ambition and the pace of that ambition. So if I look at the electric vehicle segment of the market, you can see from the figures behind me that the growth rate to last year was dramatic, but off an extremely low base. Electric vehicles are a big change for Australian consumers, and I'll go through that in more detail. But if you look at the governments, the state governments, this is not the federal government, but many state governments in Australia have an ambition of 50% EVs by 2030. That trajectory is very dramatic, as shown in the chart. Herein lies the challenge for the industry that has no domestic manufacturing, that imports vehicles, and for a country in which consumers have a preference for larger vehicles. So can electrification occur in the Australian context? Well, the answer is yes. And if you don't believe me, the statistics demonstrate this quite clearly. In the passenger motor vehicle medium segment, in Australia, year to date, almost 50% of sales are EVs. Now you may say that's good news. The problem is that segment of the market in Australia is just 5% of the market. What Australians buy, the larger vehicles, like the light commercials, the large SUVs and small SUVs, which you can see there make up well over 40% of the market. Combined, they're only about 2% of their sales are EVs. So where the product is available at the price point Australians can afford, they will buy electric vehicles. It's getting that technology across the categories of which traditionally we buy. So the scheme is called the New Vehicle Efficiency Scheme. It has extremely ambitious targets. It will require ultimately a high level of electric vehicle penetration, and there are substantial fines. The question is, who ultimately pays the fine? And I think the answer to that question, as you will all know in this room, is the consumer will pay the fine. And herein lies the challenge. So, the consumer is absolutely critical to this discussion. So what are the really big issues? Well, it's the total cost of ownership. Now, the purchase price is important, but there are 5 key factors here. Insurance, the resale price or the residual, the cost of maintenance, and fuel. It's not just the purchase price. Then, another key factor is the consumer's preference. And I've demonstrated where the consumer preference is in Australia, and it's about providing that product in a low emissions form. And that is a great challenge, given what we drive. The third issue for Australia is actually providing the infrastructure to support EVs. Australia is not just a large country, it's a continent in its own. If you drive from the east coast to the west coast of Australia, you will drive 4,000 kilometres. If you drive from the north to the south, you drive over 4,000 kilometres. I flew on Monday from Melbourne to Singapore. It took me 4 hours to fly across Australia. It is a huge country. So, we are a huge country with just 27 million people. How do you provide the electricity to all the points in that country to support electric vehicles? It is an enormous challenge, and I make this point because the point is every country on the transformation to low emission vehicles has multiple challenges, and quite often they are unique to the country. So we're also going through a process of electricity market reform. That means we wish to provide green energy supplies, and Australia has an abundance of wind and sunshine. Hence we have wind turbines, and we have a very high penetration of solar electricity. But the challenge is to get that electricity to the market because it is generated in new areas. So there has to be enormous generation of poles and wires put into place. We then have to provide the recharging infrastructure to support EVs, and that is going to be an enormous challenge, especially given our highway system and the size of it. So the message I leave you, as we've heard before this morning, industry, government need to work together, but the third and most important element of this equation is the consumer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. So, Mike, you can, I think it's better to speak there. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll use this microphone so you can see me. Okay, I'd like to give you a perspective from the UK, a European country that's not in Europe. We used to be, then we had Brexit. That's democracy. As Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst political system, apart from all the others. Anyway, let me talk a bit about UK. First of all, Mike Hawes, Chief Exec of the SMMT. We represent the automotive industry in the UK, not just manufacturers, but importers, supply chain, cars, bus, truck, taxi, aftermarket. We try and be a one-stop shop. As everyone has said, the industry is a critical part of the UK economy. It's a critical part of society, delivering the goods, the services, the transport, the mobility on which society depends. As an organisation, and my congratulations to APIA for 30 years, this year we are 122 years old. I was there at the beginning. We were formed both to promote the industry and at the time defend it. And it is something I think we all still have to do at the moment. Now, politically, we have a new government. It's been in 102 days now. And it's inheriting some legislation, some regulation, but it's also bringing together some new ideas and new approaches. First and foremost, its number one priority is economic growth. And we see ourselves as very much part of that, and it announced on Monday an industrial strategy for the long term. And again, in this room would appreciate that. The challenge is when you always face political terms, which may be 3, 4, 5 years, 3 years in Australia, isn't it? Yeah. 10 years is the minimum you need to have a transitional policy and an industrial one. But they've also inherited 2 things from the previous one. First, net zero. That is a statutory requirement. It is the law that the UK delivers net zero by 2050. And we have carbon budgets every 5 years, which are the law. If the government doesn't have in place policies that will deliver those incremental carbon savings, the NGOs, the green groups, take the government to court and win. The government then has to change its policies to deliver it. So this is not something you can backtrack on from a regulatory perspective. The second thing is, this new government has said it will move the date for the end of sale of petrol and diesel cars from 2035 to 2030. Now, they don't actually mean totally zero emission. I think they will amend that to include hybrids. But this is going to be a priority. So matching the environmental ambition with the industrial ambition is the challenge. One other point to make in all of this. The government, the pre-past one and the new one have the same definition. They mean zero means zero. That's not just zero carbon, it is zero pollutants. 0 NOx, 0 PM, which means combustion as part of the technological solution is under threat. Because if you're considering hydrogen combustion, you do produce trace elements of that. So we need to make sure in the formation of the policies, you both meet the obligations to be zero emissions, especially in towns and cities which have clean air zones, which is regulation that complements the carbon regulation, but also you maintain that consumer choice, and that's where the difficulty is. So where are we? In terms of the shift towards EVs, it's not bad, it's getting better. You can see the growth there in terms of electrical registrations. We expect this year to be somewhere between 18 and 90% pure battery emission vehicle emissions. So it's really good. Compare that to Europe, we're the second largest market for new car sales, we're the second largest market for battery electric vehicles after Germany. So that's looking quite good. Compared to the rest of Europe, we're actually more recently overperforming. As I said there, last year, total market growth, you can see where the figures are. The terms of growth we're at the moment, we're at 17.2%. BEV share is higher than Europe. Now, what is driving that? This is where you see the market movement. More models on the market. There's something like 120 battery electric vehicles on the market now in the UK. The market growth, though, is being driven 70 to 80% by business and fleet buyers. That's the engine of the change, because they have incentives. In the UK market, there are no incentives for the private buyer to buy a battery electric vehicle, despite those high ambitions. So you can see the massive impact that the fleet buyers are having. And it makes sense if your company car tax, it makes a much more affordable choice. In terms of where are these vehicles coming from? Increasingly, we are seeing more new battery electric vehicles coming from the rest of Europe. Initially, the new entrants were coming from China. And we get a lot of our vehicles which may look like they have a European badge or an American badge, but they come from China, lower cost base and stuff. All our Teslas, for instance, who are the market leader in terms of battery electric vehicles, come from China. So when you remember that we are, as an industry, 80% of what we produce, we export. As a market, over 80% of what we buy comes from abroad, so we're kind of in balance. The importance of free and fair trade is critical as you move very much part of this transition. But there's one piece of regulation that is driving this change in particular. We have in place a mandate, came into force 1st of January. This compels every brand this year to sell 22%. I said we're about 17, 18 at the moment. By the end of the year, 22% of every sale must be zero emission vehicle. That's not plug-in hybrids, by the way, it's pure electric vehicle. That rises to 80% by 2030, potentially going to 100% 2035. We are behind the curve, and the reason we are behind the curve is that what we're hearing from the evidence, the level of private demand is below where the political ambition is. So what do we need? We say we need more incentives, more consumer incentives and so forth to try and drive that demand, which isn't there. It's unsurprising, these vehicles are more expensive. There are uncertainties about infrastructure. The cost, some of which Tony alluded to, residual values, the cost of charging, the cost of electricity. Some of the assumptions that were behind this regulation haven't come to fruition. But beyond no illusion, this is an incredibly challenging target. If you miss it, for every car that you miss it by, you have to pay £15,000 per car. And if you want to understand what's going on in the marketplace, we expect this year that the industry will incentivise, in other words, put cash on the bonnet, over £2 billion, what's that, over 12 billion Russian ruble, just in incentives. That's not manufacturing, that's not distribution, that is in incentives alone to try and buy market share, because that natural level of demand isn't there. So it's hugely challenging. The other backdrop, and as I said before, I won't touch on this, infrastructure is behind the curve. They need to build ahead of demand to ensure that the consumer is confident. But it's not just about cars, trucks as well. We spoke about it before. Again, government ambition, 2040 for the end of sale of diesel trucks, 2035 for the trucks that are around 26 tonnes. Some of those vehicles you can see now already on the roads. Refuse collection vehicles, garbage trucks, it tends to lend itself more towards electrification because they go depot to depot, single shift, you're seeing some of those. Other use cases is much more difficult to achieve, but we need to achieve all of that. The good news sector, however, is the bus industry. Last year, we were the biggest market for zero-emission buses, over 40-45%, I think it was. Again, it lends itself towards electrification. You can package the batteries easily in a bus. You can do depot charging. You know which route they're doing, so you can model the use case. So different sectors, while facing the same target, have different solutions, but will then move at different paces. And the challenge for the industry as a whole, and it is the entire industry, is to remove fossil fuel dependency by 2035. I think we are on the way to it, but unless every single part of the ecosystem, that is the manufacturers, it is government, it is the charge point industry, it's the energy industry, it's the leasing industry, it's the insurance industry. You need every single part of that ecosystem to play its role. Without it, it's no surprise that the consumer's much more hesitant. And what we are seeing, they'll take the approach, we'll just wait and see. And that's the worst thing you could have in terms of outcome for carbon savings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You see how old this might be? It's 120 something years, correct? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I will step down because I think John is better to be also in this panel because he's coming the Q&A if you like it. I want to invite you here. So you can see, my dear people here, dear friends, international Romanian, you have at least 3 big powers of the automotive industry: United States, Europe, and China. You have it here. It's unique. So you will have a chance to ask whatever question you want. That will be 10 minutes, and I will just warm up a little bit the session with Sigrid by inviting her to tell us, because I promised you to clarify what the Prime Minister is trying to say about the next 2 years. To invite her, because I know I say is doing a lot of calculation. What does it mean, the 2025 and 2026, as a result of not changing the CO2 emissions? I know there are calculations how much money will be fines in Europe.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. First of all, it was indeed encouraging to hear the Prime Minister acknowledge that there is such a huge issue, and also that his government is one of those in Europe that are looking to take measures. And indeed, ASEA has asked for early relief measures for 2025, but also to pull forward the review of the legislation on CO2 that is part of the currently agreed legislation to 2025, to really look at how we can fix some of the flaws that we see in the layout of the European approach. Because, as I mentioned before, indeed there are targets, manufacturers are doing their jobs, the models are coming into the market, but the market is missing because of lacking confidence and lacking infrastructure. So if you look at 2025, what we say, there is a disproportionate cost of compliance that is looming, that is pending to impact industry. And one way of expressing what the impact could be is that if you miss the targets in 2025, like in the UK, there are heavy penalties, and they could add up to about 16 billion euros of penalties. That is about 12-13 billion for passenger cars, and another 3 to 4 billion for light commercial vehicles, so vans. So that's an enormous amount of money. And let me be clear, manufacturers will comply with the law. So it's not about not complying, it's about the compliance cost, and we believe it's a disproportionate burden. If manufacturers choose to avoid paying fines, which they have a couple of mechanisms they can use, they can also buy credits of other manufacturers, pure EV manufacturers, for example. Those credits do have a price, of course, too. And again, it would be money, funds that you can't invest in further innovation, in greening your fleet. You could also choose to produce fewer vehicles, which is indeed about market share in the end. what is your footprint still going to be here? And you can choose to cut price. It's a bit what Mike also alluded to and said you will buy market share because you incentivize sales. But all of these, again, are disproportionate burdens at a critical time in this revolution, to quote François, to decarbonization of transport and mobility. So we have called on the EU institutions, the new Commission, the new Parliament, to really take urgent relief measures and make this work in a better way. Because again, the models are there, manufacturers have really made that turn, but there is a flaw in the system and they should not be the ones paying the price for that.
So, 16 billion, right? Okay.
In
Now,
just 1 year.
you have 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And you will have mics. Bogdan will be the first one. So I will try to ask, you can ask as many questions. So Diana will give you a mic. In English, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Bogdan Alecu from the Financial Newspaper in Romania. I do have a question for both Sigrid and John, and also for Mr. Wang when it comes to China. We were discussing about the impact, the economic impact of electrification. But what about the impact of jobs? How many jobs will be lost or won in Europe and the US or the world? And what was the impact in China? And for China, was it a better strategy to invest in first place in electrification, in the electric industry, and not in ICE, in combustion engines? Thank you.
Should I go first? Because thank you for the question. It's a very good one and a very important one because the societal impact is going to be huge as well. So 16 billion in euros in penalties. You could also express that in yet another way. You could say if we reduce the number of vehicles produced in Europe, that would be over 2.5 million vehicles fewer produced, which in turn means about 8 to 10 plants, automotive plants, which in turn means about 500,000 jobs on the edge. So I'm not saying this is all going to happen, but just indeed to give you to illustrate the magnitude of the challenge and the disproportionate burden and risk that we're facing, that we need to avoid it. Everybody wants to avoid, but this is the magnitude and the scale of the challenge that we're facing. And in order to indeed sustain jobs, and manufacturers are making huge efforts to reskill and upskill and help, have the right people in the workforce for vehicle manufacturing, also battery manufacturing, across the value chain. We need to sustain that. It's a thriving industry that Europe needs. It's not by coincidence that China, also the US authorities are doing their utmost to secure a healthy, forward-looking industry in their countries, because it's an industry that sustains the economy at large, across the value chain, upstream and downstream, and that really is essential for an economy. Apart from services, you need a manufacturing base, and the auto industry is one way of sustaining and achieving that.
John?
Yes, again, I agree with Sigrid. This is an excellent question. In the United States, almost 10 million Americans rely on the auto industry in one way or another for their livelihoods, for their employment. About 3 million of those jobs are in auto manufacturing. That means the building of the vehicles as well as parts and components and technologies. So this is a massive contributor to the US economy. For every dollar that's invested in automotive manufacturing, $3.45 of economic value is created. And so this question you're asking, the balance between the policy goals of emission reductions as well as economic activity is absolutely critical. And so what the US policymakers have tried to do with regard to balancing those goals is to not only establish regulations to reduce emissions, but to create an industrial strategy
that supports the transformation of the automotive industrial base. And that is mostly seen in what we call the Inflation Reduction Act. There are a series of subsidies and loan programs to support the industrial transformation, investments in battery manufacturing and the EV supply chain, as well as subsidies to support consumer affordability and awareness. And so the approach in the United States is to try and balance the impact on the economy through developing a strategic set of investments in the transformation of the industrial base. Now, Van?
Thank you. Yeah, really, this is a good question. I really agree with Sigrid and John. And as for the job, as I mentioned in the speech, that's the population of the 10% of the working population are in the car industry. And we're not seeing that the percentage is decreasing. So with the new energy vehicle industry increase, and we're creating more jobs, just like the batteries. And actually we're, as for your second question, we're really trying to balance the internal combustion engine vehicles and the new energy vehicles. You can see in the China market these years that we're considering the plug-in vehicle, not only just the UK, the ZEV. So when your battery miles can exceed 100 miles, most of the time you're not using the gasolines. So in China, we're not so aggressive to set a milestone. So when we're stopping the ICVs, we're still trying to keep the balance between the ICV and the NEV. So it's not when you're talking about how to keep the balance investing in the new energy vehicles or ICV, I think I cannot see the date before 2050 that ICV can distinguish. Just like the battery. So the battery is expensive. Even though in China we have already decreased the cost to 10% of 10 years ago. But we cannot see the price going down little further. So when we are talking about the consumer point, they just want using the car that they only worry about the driving range. So when you have the battery, like you can support 100 miles, and you have an internal combustion engine in it that can generate the electricity in an emergency situation. So this internal combustion engine is solving the problem of worry about the driving range. And it costs less than we're putting more batteries. And it costs the less weight, which can give furthermore energy efficiencies. So in conclusion, we're keeping the balance. We're not seeing the ICV is decreasing. And of course, the new energy vehicle is really the trend. Thank you.
Yes, just one statistical point you have to understand about job losses. When you lose one job in a car manufacturer plant, that means 3 indirect jobs in the services, in the subcontractors and others, plus side effects. Less taxes for the local population, up to less students in the university, so maybe we close the university.
You always have to have this in mind, and it can kill some small cities relying only on the car industry.
Thank you. Other questions, please. Come on, don't be shy. This is the one and only opportunity. Hey, nobody. So easy, so convincing. Well, oh, there is a question there, please. The mic is...
Hello, I'm Adrian Mitra, automotive journalist in Romania. I have a question for Sigrid Rodriguez, related to the market challenges that we have right now in Europe. It looks like in the public interventions of various car manufacturers, CEOs and presidents, it looks like a change of tone towards electromobility. Which is your view on that, and what is actually happening? It is the electrons pedal lifted now, or the industry is still going full power on EVs? Thank you.
Thank you for another excellent question. I think what you're witnessing is this balancing act that industry finds itself in, because we need to keep the foot on the accelerator when it comes to electrification. Electric is going to be the predominant technology, maybe not in all corners of society and for all modes of transport, but certainly the dominant technology. So we want this transformation to work, and we want it to work fast. But at the same time, we need a reality check, because things are not adding up at the moment. Things are not going to plan. And the consequences of this not going to plan could be grave, could be severe. So we need actions taken to building more flexibility, and I think my colleague from China has given you an example how China is really keen, and I think John could also vouch for California doing the same, to take consumer choice and consumer considerations more into account by offering a way to transition into this revolution that François was talking about before. So having the strictest possible targets in Europe and the strictest possible interpretation of how to get there in terms of technology really makes it very, very difficult. So there is no U-turn, no reversing, no going back. We know what the future will be, but we also want this to work. So we need urgently this reality check to fix the flaws in the system. That's, I think, the job that we see for policymakers and society, and industry is fully part of it. They're also ready to deliver.
If I'm allowed, one more question, Dan, for John. Yeah. It is related, for everybody that has an answer to this, it is about the cost per kilometer. As an EV user myself, I find myself in a situation when I can use my vehicle with a cost per kilometer very affordable, or 10 times more. When it comes to petrol, I'm not talking about free right now, I'm talking about cheap and expensive, right? When it comes to petrol, we don't have that many variations. You don't fuel your car with a penny and then to 10 pennies, right? So should the electric mobility be more affordable than petrol? Should cost the same? Should be more expensive? What's your take on that? Thank you.
John? Yeah, this is a great question, and I think it's a very important question. What you're getting at is what I would describe as a lack of transparency about the true cost of e-driving. This is definitely true in the US, and it sounds like it's true here in Romania. So, and across Europe. This is a problem, and it needs to be fixed. This is what I was getting at earlier. There are elements of this transition that are beyond the control of the car companies. This is one of them. Electrical utilities need to provide consumers with transparency and some equities in this business. Here's what I mean. Most charging right now in the US is happening at home. About 80% of
EV charging is happening at home. And so being able to provide the customer with the ability, for example, to control the charging experience so that they're charging at non-peak periods and then making the consumer aware of what those prices are is something really important. We're working with policymakers in the US to make that happen. The other problem is public charging, especially high-speed charging, incredibly expensive. Part of the reason for that in the US is because utilities don't have a new way of providing the charge point operators with affordable electricity. They are charging the CPOs as if there are somebody charging there all the time. You can't make a business doing that. And so these things have to change. My last point, electric vehicles will be a benefit to utilities because manufacturers are creating bi-directional vehicles. In other words, vehicles that of course take the charge from the grid to the car, but also can offer the charge back to the grid. It's a form of energy storage. This is going to provide utilities and therefore all ratepayers with benefits in the future. All of this needs to develop into a customer proposition that should balance out and reduce the cost of charging. But right now, this has to be fixed because otherwise it's a barrier. Mike?
Yeah, just two quick additional points. I totally agree with what John says, and it's the same, I think, to the world, but two additional points. You also, I talked before about the need for everyone to engage and to support the transition. One of the roles of governments is to make sure that the taxation they levy on energy is consistent. In the UK, for instance, you charge on the street, you're paying 20% VAT, charge at home, it's 5% VAT. For what? It's the same unit of energy. And the other thing is where the industry comes in. I mentioned before, the level of discounting that's there in the market is immediately seen by those who set the residual values. So you are paying a lot in depreciation at the moment for an EV compared to a petrol car, which needs to be fed in. If we can make sure it's a healthy market, the residuals will be better, the cost of ownership over a 3-5 year period comes down, becomes a much more compelling proposition.
Anyone of you want to add something? Okay. Other questions? So one more question there.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Ms. Sigrid de Vries. I'm Daniel Vlad from Kempower. I represent a charging point manufacturer in Europe. And I wanted to ask you how fast can automotive industries and European Commission can have a long-term strategy on this revolution? Because from what I saw in China, and I heard a statement from Ms. Stella Li, the Executive Vice President of the ID Group, is that the manufacturers have a clear strategy from 10 to 20 years from now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't think it's a lack of ideas or strategy, but it needs to be more synchronized. What we see in Europe is that there are very ambitious targets for vehicle manufacturers, sales targets, but the infrastructure targets, so for charging infrastructure and refueling infrastructure, they lag behind. And there is also no linkage, or not enough at least, between what other levels of policy are doing, city policy or regional, national, and the same for the industrial value chain. You see very disparate measures taken across Europe, which doesn't really help. So we need to be way more coordinated. And of course, that's difficult in Europe because you have 27 member states that also not always see eye to eye or want to compete with each other. So I think there's a huge task ahead, and I mentioned Mr. Draghi's report before. He made some good recommendations there. So indeed, it's about being agile, adapt to real-world circumstances, finding together and having that clear destination to work towards. So we just need to get better at it, I would say.
Thank you very much.
I propose you to to finish now the Q&A. Before we go to a break, allow me to say, not conclusions, because we are far from conclusions, but to say something which will complicate even more the whole discussion. I just came myself back from Paris Motor Show, like most of the people here and also in the room, maybe several of you been there. And I spent some time talking with Carlos Tavares, and I realized that even inside our dear industry in Europe, there are different perspectives of what needs to be done. And to be very transparent, Carlos is very much against changing the CO2 regulations, which are in place for next year, but it was decided in 2021. And obviously, Luca Nemeo, which is the president of ASEA, representing the other manufacturers, is on the totally opposite direction, which by the end of the day is complicating a little bit, even inside the industry, the perspectives. And yes, please.
Yeah, then I agree with you that on the surface they disagree, but I think that deep down they agree way more, because they agree they want to decarbonize transport, they agree about the destination, they agree about that it's going to be very, very challenging, and I'm just quoting both of them here. And they also agree that you need ambitious targets to get there. But the way how to get there, I think there they take different approaches. Part of that is a little bit of marketing sometimes, I think, too. Because as I said, disproportionate cost of compliance, they can have the face of penalties, but also of cutting jobs, or squeezing suppliers, or so I think it's our joint task to not let that happen. And in a way, I think they actually agree on that. But it's my personal opinion.
Absolutely. I just said that it's not a question of the future. Actually, John said very clearly, the electric vehicle is the future. We in Apia said also many times, the only big question is when and how is the future. Because obviously, if we take 2050, I think it's for sure fully electric. Although we tend to forget, as Apia take here, that when we speak about electrification, we initially, as professionals, we are speaking about the sales, about new car sales, because the electrification process is just started a few years ago, honestly. And we tend to forget the existing car and vehicle park on the planet, which is huge, it's more than 1 billion. And some people keep saying, oh no, if we put all the cars tomorrow electric, we will not have enough power, enough grid. It's a totally wrong approach. It's not like that, because we can't do that. We can't replace tomorrow 1 billion vehicles with another 1 billion electric vehicles. So in Apia we have also an expression I hope the media will keep in mind: do not invent problems in the future. Let's try to solve our problems today and to find solutions in the future. It's exactly what everyone here tried to say. If we invent problems in the future, that would be wrong. And by the way, even we don't know for sure if that kind of problems will be a part of our future. Being said that, I want to tell you that, as promised, after the break, our dear colleague and my dear friend Professor Bernd Gottschalk will come on stage, and he will give his perspective of the mobility. Be prepared to be shocked, because he is not anymore OICA president, he is not anymore VDA president, he is just Bernd Gottschalk. He is not anymore Mercedes, by the way. He was 35 years in Mercedes, the board. And he told me, I am free to talk. And I said, as long as I am here, the moderator, the president, everybody is free to talk. We are in Romania, we are still free to talk. Thank you very much. So see you in about 15 minutes. Okay? Thank you very much.